Hey guys, it's me, Kari. I will definitely be filming I'm not an unboxing, a haul of what I purchased at the New Jersey Horror Con this past weekend. Today's Tuesday. We just got home yesterday, but I'm really tired. I honestly, over the course of 3 nights, I think I only got about 6 hours sleep total, so I'm really, really, really exhausted. But I did have two requests on my Insta yesterday to continue reading Dicey songs, so I apologize that there's been such a big lapse in between. I'm going to pick up with it right now, that little preamble out of the way. I can speak. Here we go. Afterwards, Dicey couldn't remember if it was that same afternoon or another one that she got home to find Graham slamming around the kitchen. When she tried to remember, she only knew that it came between Thanksgiving and Christmas that day. If she could have, she would have thanked Mama for waiting so long to give them time to get used to each other. When she found Graham crashing piles of dinner plates down onto the counter and then angrily scrubbing out the cupboard with a sponge, Dicey figured the welfare check had arrived again. Whenever it came, Graham was in a bad mood for at least a day. I've been thinking, Dicey said to the stiff back. It's only 4.5 years before I can get a full-time job. Then we won't need any extra help from anyone. Graham slammed the plates back in place and began pulling out glasses. When a glass shattered, she seemed satisfied rather than angry. No, you won't. You're going to college, girl, whether you like it or not. But, Dicey said, I didn't and your grandfather didn't, so you are, and James, and probably Sammy too. There's to be no more talk about quitting school. She jammed the broom into the closet and she got back to the shelves. Did any of your children? Dicey asked. She was playing for time, fishing around in her mind for some understanding of why her grandmother seemed so particularly het up. John did, last I saw of him. He was gone and gone. Ah, Dicey said. Her grandmother's hair was slicked down as if she'd combed it with a wet comb. Now go get together some clothes, Graham said. She still didn't look at Dicey. There's a suitcase in your room. I already put my stuff in it. But why? We're going to Boston. To see Mama? But why? I'll miss school and work, and who'll take care of the little kids? Is something wrong? But Graham wouldn't answer her. She wouldn't answer any of them when they asked. Dicey thought it must be bad news, and probably that Mama was worse. But how could she be worse? Or dead. But why would Graham take Dicey and go up to Boston if that were the case? Sammy thought maybe Mama was better. Maybe coming home with them. James didn't say a word, but he agreed with Dicey, she could tell. Maybeth just sat quiet at the table. She had her hands clasped together in front of her, clasped tight. Mr. Lingerly was going to drive Graham and Dicey to the airport in Salisbury, where they would take a plane to the airport in Baltimore, where they would try to get a plane to Boston. We can't afford that, Dicey said. We're selling that wretched cranberry spoon, Graham told her. It's not a vacation. She glared at Dicey. Dicey packed underwear and her brown dress and a couple of blouses. She wore her jumper for traveling in. She put the few dollars she'd saved from her wages in the pocket of her jumper, just in case. She wished she knew what to expect, so that she could begin getting ready, but Graham wouldn't say anything. It was a deep, hazy twilight when Mr. Lingerly drove them up in front of the little airport building. Graham had sat silent and hunched forward all the way up here. Neither Dicey nor Mr. Lingerly could think of anything to say, except when Mr. Lingerly looked at Dicey in the rearview mirror and told her, I'll call your school to tell them where you are. At the airport, Graham burst out of the car and into the one-room building. Dicey and Mr. Lingerly hurried after her, not even bothering to park the car properly. Dicey carried the suitcase. The plane they were going to take was already outside, its two engines grinding, its two propellers turning. Mr. Lingerly came with them as far as a tall cyclone fence. Mrs. Tillerman? Ab, he said, awkward. I just want to say I'll take care of the kids. Don't worry on that score. Graham turned a stony face to him. I know that, or I wouldn't have asked you. She didn't say it very nicely, Dicey thought, but the effect on Mr. Lingerly was as if she had paid him a huge compliment. He stood up a little straighter. He pulled an envelope out of his pocket. Here, he said, just in case. What is it? Graham demanded. Some money, he told her. You might need it if you're there long. Dicey stood, biting her lip. The little windows in the plane shone yellow, and the air was filled with the noise of the engines. Purple twilight crowded down around them. I thank you, Graham said. She took the envelope and, without looking at it, put it into her purse. Then she wheeled around. Come along, girl, she said. Dicey picked up their suitcase and followed her onto the plane. There were only a couple other people riding on that flight, two men in business suits who had papers spread in front of them. They drank something from short glasses and talked. Graham took a seat by the window. You sit ahead of me if you want to look out, she instructed. A man in the a man in only the trousers and hat of a uniform, his plaid shirt unbuttoned at the neck and the sleeves rolled up, leaned over to tell them to strap themselves in. Dicey shifted the suitcase to the floor in front of the empty seat beside her and obeyed him. She'd never ridden in a plane before. She didn't know anything about what to do. Nothing was what to do, apparently. The plane rocked along the ground for a while, then struggled up into the air. Below, looking out the window, Dicey could see scattered lights. Some of them were still, and those would be houses. Some of them moved, and those would be the cars. After a few minutes, they were over the bay. Night darkened around the humming plane. The same man offered her coffee or tea, but she shook her head. She wasn't hungry or thirsty. She wasn't anything clear. She felt her grandmother's silent, stony presence behind her, and Dicey wished she knew whatever it was that Graham knew. She felt like she shouldn't be excited about flying, but her heart lifted with the plane, and her nose was pressed against the thick glass. She felt worried and depressed about this hasty journey, because it had to mean something bad about Mama. Unless Sammy was right, but then why was Graham so angry? If Mama was going to come home, it would mean more expenses and a lot more work for Graham, until Mama could help. If it was good news and Graham was trying not to be optimistic so she wouldn't be disappointed, she might act this way. You never could tell with Graham. You could trust her, but you couldn't tell. Dicey turned her head to look at Graham through the narrow slot where her seat didn't meet the curved wall of the plane. Graham was staring out the window. She hadn't unbuckled her seatbelt. She hadn't taken off her coat. She hadn't moved her purse off her lap. Her face was turned out the window, but Dicey bet she wasn't looking outside at anything. Every now and then Graham blinked. Dicey looked back out her own window. Below her more lights clustered together, towns or cities, she thought, and the long, snaky stream of red and white lights that marked highways. She smiled down at the moving picture, like some kind of Christmas display. She shouldn't be smiling, she thought, but it was so new a way of seeing things, and beautiful, she couldn't really help herself. The airport at Baltimore was a huge, sprawling building. Graham and Dicey threaded their way through throngs of people. Dicey followed Graham, saying nothing. She stopped when Graham stopped, standing just behind her. Graham stopped first at an information booth to ask about flights to Boston, then hurried down a long hallway to the counter of an airlines. She bought 2 tickets for the 8:45 flight to Boston, one-way tickets. She checked in their suitcase. Then she led Dicey to a coffee shop and instructed her to order something to eat. "You've got to eat," she said. Dicey asked for a hamburger and french fries. Graham asked for a pot of tea. "And something to eat," Dicey told her. Graham snorted, looked at Dicey, and ordered an English muffin. The plane to Boston was a large turboprop. Dicey read in the information folder. She settled herself into the seat by the window with Graham beside her now. This plane had 2 propellers and 2 jet engines. Dicey watched the activity on the ground around them as they waited for takeoff. Graham sat stiff beside her. Dicey didn't know what Dicey, was doing there. She turned in the soft seat to ask her grandmother. They were rushing ahead into the night, and Dicey really wanted to be back home, back in her own room with nothing more to think about than whether she had done her homework well enough. She felt like asking Graham to help her. But help her with what? "Graham?" Dicey asked. Her voice croaked a little. "They just called me this morning," Graham announced. Her mouth moved, but none of the rest of her face did, and neither did her hands clasping her purse, nor her feet in stockings and loafers. Graham had placed her feet neatly by her side, neatly side by side, like empty shoes in a closet. Dicey wanted to say to Graham, "Can I help you?" But she couldn't do that. Graham wouldn't tell her. She sighed and just put her nose back against the window. The plane finally moved, taxied out of its parking slot and down to the end of the long runway marked by lights. When the big machine started down the runway, Dicey was pushed back into her seat by the speed. As it lifted off the ground, she could feel how it turned from heavy to light. She had a sensation of free flight. The plane soared up and Dicey soared up with it. "Can you feel that?" she said without turning her head. Graham didn't answer. A stewardess with her face painted on and her hair painted down neat and her uniform, as perfect as if it had been shellacked into position, brought them each a little plastic tray of juice and 1 pastry sealed into plastic. Graham also got a cup of tea. Dicey ate the pastry even though she wasn't hungry. She ate Graham's pastry too and drank both their glasses of oversweet juice. When the stewardess at last came back to take the trays, Dicey turned her attention back to the window. If she had a map, she would know what the cities below were. If she had a map, she could trace their journey northward. If she had a map, then she would ask Graham about where they were, and the two of them could talk instead of each sitting there locked into her own silence. In Boston, Graham waited by the baggage claim, pointed out their suitcase to Dicey without a word, then strode out the exit to find a cab. She gave the driver an address. By that time, Dicey was getting sleepy, but she still wondered how Graham knew where she was going. City streets passed by the cab windows, most of them empty of people, but marked by the lit signs of stores and the illuminated plate glass display windows. Dicey felt the cold on the outside of the tightly closed car windows. Their driver was a dark shape at the front of the car. Graham was a dark shape behind her. Graham took them to a motel, 2 stories high, and with some cars parked in front of it. The motel faced onto a busy street. Graham went into the office, where she filled out a form and took a key. She led Dicey, whose hands felt too cold to retain a grip on their suitcase, up some stairs and down an open walkway to a door. She opened the door. The room was square and green. It had a huge TV set attached by a chain to the wall, 2 beds, each covered by a green bedspread, and a table between them, upon which a black telephone sat under a lamp. Dicey put the suitcase down on the top of a low bureau. She caught sight of her reflection in the mirror over the bureau, both of them pale and stony-faced. Graham sat down on the bed, her purse still in her lap, her feet close together. She seemed to be thinking. Dicey found the bathroom and used it. She thought about taking a shower, but decided she didn't want to. She returned to see Graham standing in a long flannel nightgown, about to get into bed. Graham had folded back the spread on Dicey's bed. Graham went into the bathroom. Dicey stripped down to her underpants. For a top, she wore one of her shirts. Graham didn't say anything. When Dicey was settled in the strange bed, Graham reached over to turn out the lamp. The room wasn't quite dark because the light from the motel's fluorescent sign slipped in through a crack in the curtains. The noise from the highway outside pushed in too. Dicey lay on her back and looked up at the ceiling. "What about Mama?" she demanded harshly across the darkness. No sound marked her grandmother in bed, as if Graham was lying like Dicey and staring at the ceiling. "Graham?" "Tomorrow," her grandmother said. Graham woke Dicey the next morning. Dicey changed into clean underwear and a fresh blouse. She pulled on her high socks and tied her sneakers. She washed her face and brushed her teeth before putting on her jumper. Graham was entirely dressed by the time she had finished, dressed and standing by the door. Dicey grabbed her jacket. Graham wore an old blue wool coat with big round buttons up the front, which hung tired from her shoulders. They had a quick breakfast in a coffee shop down the street. Then Graham headed up past the motel, walking so fast Dicey had no time to notice what they were walking past. "How do you know where you're going?" she panted. Her breath came out of her mouth like smoke. She jammed her hands into her pockets and noticed how white and cold Graham's fingers looked on the hand holding the purse. "He gave me directions." "Who?" "The doctor." 2 blocks up from the motel and 1 block off the busy street, Graham mounted cement steps to a square brick building. She entered through the heavy wooden doors that swung out into the cold. Each door had a green wreath on it. Dicey scurried after her. Why had Graham told her to come along, she wondered angrily. She might as well not be there, for all the attention her grandmother paid to her. The building looked like it had once been a school. It had a broad central corridor. A woman sat at a long desk in the middle of this, with chairs lined up in rows on either side of her. All of the chairs were empty. Graham marched up to the woman. "I'm Abigail Tillerman," she said. The woman's face registered no expression. She was a soft-looking woman, with her hair in white waves and a light sweater over her creamy blouse. Her nails gleamed pink. "Yes?" she asked politely. "My daughter," Graham began. Understanding flashed across the woman's face. She put one hand on the phone beside her. "Yes, of course, Mrs. Tillerman. Dr. Epstein is expecting you. You'll want to go down the hall, take the 2nd door on your left and the 4th door on your right after that." "I want to see my daughter," Graham said. "But Dr. Epstein, and it's not visiting hours," the woman mumbled. She still had her hand on the phone. Then she said, "All right, the little girl can wait down here. It's the 4th floor, the ward on your left. I'll call up to tell them to expect you then. The elevators are back by the entrance. You can't miss them." "The little girl," Graham said, "will come with me." Dicey almost smiled in relief at Graham acting normal again. "If you insist," the woman said. Her worried eyes went from Graham to Dicey and then back to Graham. Graham didn't say anything. "They're self-service elevators," the woman said weakly. It was a large elevator, about as big as Dicey's bedroom at home. 2 young men in white pants and doctor's shirts were on it, but they didn't say a word and got off at the 3rd floor. Dicey and Graham got off at the top and walked down a central hallway that matched the one downstairs. The linoleum had been laid on in blocks and worn down, colorless. The place smelled of a cleansing liquid, and the empty hall reverberated with muffled sounds. As they came to a set of glass-topped swinging doors, a nurse came through them. She stepped out into the hallway. Her uniform was crisp, and she wore a white cap on top of her brown hair. She had a heavy, strong face. "Mrs. Tillerman, I'm Preston, the floor nurse." The voice was soft and sweet, like a summer breeze. As soon as she heard the nurse's voice, Dicey felt better, as if things couldn't be so bad after all. Preston's voice didn't match at all with her face or her mottled red hands. It would be soothing to hear her voice, Dicey thought, if you were sick. "And you must be the oldest girl. Dicey, wasn't it?" Preston asked. Dicey looked up and then looked down again. Her tongue was twisted in her mouth, but she couldn't answer. "Just come with me, then," Preston said. It was a big room where the light was tinged with yellow from the nurse's shades halfway down over the windows. After the nurse's desk with a counter and a phone, with cabinets filled with bottles, the room was filled with beds in rows. Each bed was surrounded on 3 sides by curtains. Some of the beds had people lying flat in them. Some had people drawn up, knees drawn up, hands drawn up around knees, bodies drawn up back against the headboards. One of the figures, which Dicey saw out of the corner of her eye as they walked past, was so small she couldn't help staring at it. It was a kid, a little kid about as big as Sammy. The little figure curled back against the pillow, staring blankly ahead. Dicey had never seen anybody so still, not even Sammy deep asleep. "Here we are," Preston said. She stood aside. Graham went to one side of the bed. Dicey stood at the foot. Inside her, her heart was squeezed tight against her chest. She stood and stared. Her heart was squeezed so tight it broke into pieces, sharp pieces that cut against her lungs and throat and stomach. Mama. All right, guys, that is the end of chapter 9. So we're going to start with chapter 10 next time. We have roughly 35 pages left in the book, so we're getting really close to the end. I will really try to read some more tomorrow, and hopefully within the next couple days we'll have the book complete. I was also asked by several people if I'm going to read the rest of the books in the Tillerman cycle. I believe there are 7 or 8 altogether. Unfortunately, Homecoming and Dicey's Song are the only 2 that I own, so this is going to be it. But if I, have access to them at some point in the future, perhaps we'll continue on with the rest of the books. But I hope you guys are enjoying this series. I just think both of these books are brilliant. I've read and reread them many times since my first reading when I was about 10 years old. They're just classics to me. So again, I really hope you're enjoying. Thank you to the, I believe it was 2 young ladies who requested on my Insta that I read this. If not, I apologize in advance. Based on the handles, I assumed that you were girls, but if you're not, that's cool. If you're boys, doesn't matter to me. But anyway, thank you for requesting and reminding me to get back to this. So, all right, that's it for now. I'll be back with more stuff. Bye, guys.